For decades, the battleship was seen as the pinnacle of naval technology. Boasting big guns and thick armor, these warships have become iconic, with both their victories and sinkings being remembered in books, movies, and even songs. With the evolution of naval warfare away from gun battles towards far longer range engagements with aircraft and missiles, the battleship lives on today like the dinosaurs, only seen in museums. However, this hasn't stopped everyone from enthusiasts to politicians regularly calling for their return. While on the surface some of these arguments can seem logical, is there truly any value in resurrecting them, or is this a worse idea than John Hammond bringing back the dinosaurs for a theme park? Join me today as we try to answer the question, should we bring back the battleship? Before we get into that though, I want to give a huge thanks to the sponsor of today's video, World of Warships Legends. World of Warships Legends is a free-to-play tactical naval combat game available for PlayStation and Xbox, as well as cross-platform on PC through Steam. With over 8 million players, it features over 600 ships, including a wide variety of battleships from over 10 different nations, with more being added to the game regularly. Their latest update extends this further into modern warships, including guided missiles and other new weapons systems. So whether you've never tried the game for yourself or have played previously, now is the perfect time to download and start playing. I've already done so myself and will be using the game throughout this video as we discuss our topic for today. Get the game for yourself with my link below, and a huge thanks again to them for sponsoring this video. While we could jump directly into discussing the debate over bringing back the battleship, I think before that, it's important to briefly go over the history of the battleship itself and establish exactly why they fell out of favor in the first place. For this, we could really get into the weeds and go all the way back to the days of the ironclad warships, but I think we can get away with skipping ahead a bit to save time. The term battleship originates from the so-called line of battleships from the Age of Sail, and much like the term tank, has been used for a wide variety of ship designs throughout history. However, the more well-known iteration of this design originated shortly after the inception of the ironclad, with the adoption of turreted designs. Shortly after these ironclad battleships came what is now known as the pre-dreadnought, which was a design that was chock full of various gun calibers alongside their main battery. After decades of navies working to one-up each other, the British were the first to bring the concept of the dreadnought to reality with the HMS Dreadnought. This idea had been around for many years by the time that Dreadnought was put in commission, with one of the most notable advocates being the Italian general Vittorio Cuniberti in 1903, and called for the disposal of the multiple calibers in favor of one unified battery of all big guns. This would define the design for all future battleship designs, and by the end of World War I, the pinnacle of the design would see the adoption of significantly larger guns and heavier armor seen in ships such as the well-known Colorado and Nagato class super dreadnoughts. As with everything in warfare, this would not be the end of the battleship's evolution, as the interwar period would see the introduction of the fast battleship that effectively blended armor and firepower with speeds unheard of in the dreadnought era. These ships would also host some of the most powerful battleships ever built, such as the Iowa, Yamato, and Littorio classes, but their immense potential would not protect them from the rapidly developing technologies in the mid-20th century. The end of World War II would see the rise of new and ever-potent contenders, such as the aircraft carrier, jet aircraft, and missiles, quickly usurping the battleship's place as the queens of the naval battlefield. As the Cold War progressed, the effectiveness of aircraft, aircraft carriers, anti-ship missiles, and to a lesser degree advances in submarine designs pretty quickly made the armor and firepower of a battleship obsolete. Smaller, missile-armed ships had the ability to engage each other at ranges that a battleship could only dream of, and with weaponry that had the potential to cripple one without it even having the chance to fight back. Despite this, the battleship still had the potential to be an effective force in the realm of fire support and national prestige, with the United States recommissioning the Iowa class in the 1980s in response to the Soviet Kirov-class missile cruiser. This reactivation would see a significant effort to give the ships a fighting chance to survive combat in the missile age, with the incorporation of Tomahawk cruise missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, modern radars, close-in weapon systems or CWIS, and even drones to assist with gunnery. Eventually, the ships would be decommissioned yet again in the early 90s, but the discussion of the future of the battleship would continue on. With recent headlines reporting the US burning through its supply of missiles against targets in Iran faster than we can replace them, could a ship armed with large, long-range guns serve as a cheaper alternative to ballistic missiles for striking targets? After all, a metal shell filled with explosives is easier and more cost-effective to produce compared to a guided missile packed with expensive technology, right? Unfortunately for fans of the battleship, this is not as simple as it may seem. For one thing, the ships themselves simply don't exist. Many point to the aforementioned refits of the Iowas as proof that we did it before, and that is true, but not only are these now museum ships, which would require immense amounts of money to reactivate, the cost to keep them in action after that would be prohibitive. Just the maintenance on these ships as static museums can be staggeringly expensive. I was lucky enough to see the USS New Jersey when she was towed to dry dock, with the bill for that work coming in at $10 million. That's a bargain when you actually look into the cost involved in putting them back into service. When the Iowa class saw reactivation in the 1980s thanks to President Reagan, this cost the taxpayers a staggering $1.7 billion. Adjusted for inflation, this would be equivalent to around $6.25 billion today for just 4 ships. Even assuming the cost of refitting these ships was the same as it was back in the 80s, which it absolutely would not be, this also ignores a much bigger issue. Who is going to manufacture the ammunition? When these ships were refitted, the stockpile of shells manufactured previously was still sufficient to supply the battleships. Even today, many of these are likely still in storage, however, there are no active production lines ready to churn out shells. So on top of the cost to refit the ships, you also need to factor in the costs to start producing ammunition for them if you plan to keep them in service long term. This is before we even consider the fact that bringing these outdated ships back to life at this point is simply impractical rather than the alternative of building a new ship. A much more practical use of that same funding would be to put it towards increasing production capacity for the guided missiles already used by existing warships. This makes far more sense than restarting production of ammunition for only a few of them. Rather than spending years to build a new ship and production lines to support it, you could spend that same time bolstering existing infrastructure. While things like the B-52 will likely remain in service until the heat death of the universe, those are far different from a few battleships now in their 80s with just as many health problems as a person that age. When you consider this, along with the recent proposal for the Trump-class battleship, it certainly seems like the construction of new ships is the most likely way we will see them return. Speaking of the B-52, you know what else is a lot cheaper than guided missiles? Bombs. What good is a battleship with less than 30 miles of range when you can launch a plane capable of dropping a far larger payload with extreme precision, or launch one of the aforementioned missiles from hundreds or even thousands of miles away? So if bombardment on a budget isn't really a viable reason to bring back the battleship, is there another potential niche for them? One argument I've seen popping up more often the last few years has been in regards to their viability against the threat of kamikaze drones. In the ongoing war in Ukraine, we've seen various forms of these drones used against multiple classes of warships. This can be attributed to many factors, including the poor quality of the ships in the Russian Navy, but with many modern ships having little to no armor, it would seem to make sense that something like a battleship could more easily shrug off these attacks. I've even seen discussions around them being beneficial to prevent damage caused by another ship ramming them, which has occurred in the waters around China. When you consider the incredible punishment some of these ships have endured while stubbornly refusing to sink, this lends further credibility to the idea. Would this really be a good use for the battleship, though? Sure, they typically feature exceptional armor, but having a complement of heavy guns is arguably the main feature of a battleship, which isn't really the best armament for use against fast-moving drones, either in the air or on the water. Putting a 16-inch flak shell into a cluster of drones would likely obliterate many of them, but smaller, fast-firing guns are better for this. In fact, we have a direct historical example to compare this to with the pre-Dreadnought and Dreadnought battleships I mentioned earlier, which featured not just large primary guns, but smaller secondary and in some cases even tertiary armaments to target torpedo boats. I certainly think we could see some form of heavily armored anti-air or anti-drone platform to help protect battle groups, but this would probably take the form of an anti-air cruiser or even the floating anti-air barges built by Germany during World War II. We also have yet to see the true effectiveness of these systems against a full battle group, with them largely being used against ships in port or in much smaller groups. I'm personally extremely skeptical that a swarm of drones large enough to cause serious damage to something like an aircraft carrier would be able to make it through without being detected and destroyed. That's also assuming they even have the range to reach them to begin with. This brings us to what I would consider the last true opportunity for the return of the battleship, that being to carry some new form of powerful weaponry. For as inefficient and ineffective of a design as the proposed Trump-class battleship is in many ways, I think this is the one detail they got right, either intentionally or by accident, with the railgun mounted on the front of the ship. While still in its infancy, the railgun concept has progressed significantly enough to see production and implementation on the Japanese test ship Asuka last year, albeit in a small caliber. The main issues that remain with this weapon is their barrel life, which is disappointingly low, usually at most 1,000 firings, and the massive amount of energy needed for their operation. However, eventually it may progress to a point that a future battleship would be able to find a use within a modern fleet as a platform for long-range railguns paired with nuclear power plants. Another potential role that has been debated for battleships would be the arsenal ship, which fully abandons the usage of guns in favor of an immense number of missiles. This concept has been discussed since its first proposal in the 1980s, with the ship being the ultimate dream of those that wish to see the return of the capital ship capable of nearly every role. In an article from the U.S. Naval Institute in 1997, proponents of the design argued that an arsenal ship would have been able to provide a large portion of the fire support munitions needed during the First Gulf War and have the benefit of being minimally manned. One design proposed by DARPA incorporated over 500 vertical launch tubes capable of firing a variety of missiles, from the Tomahawk cruise missile to the anti-aircraft Standard missile, giving the ship the ability to engage virtually any target imaginable. However, if you are a purist and prefer your battleships to be gun-armed, the US Navy's R&D has just the thing for you: the vertical gun for advanced ships, which was a project in the 1990s that saw two auto-loaded 155mm guns within a modular mounting that could fit in the same space that would normally be taken up by a Mark 41 VLS system. This system was designed to fire guided munitions with a rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute and have a magazine size of nearly 1,400 rounds. With the size of an arsenal ship, there could be a large number of these mounted on the ship along with the missile tubes. Unfortunately, two issues arise with this idea. Firstly, shells will never be capable of the same ranges of missiles, and secondly, the most glaring issue is that the VGA-S was the predecessor to the Advanced Gun System, the infamous armament of the Zumwalt class. Once again, we run into the issue of shell production, with the added bonus of it being specially designed guided shells. As interesting and potentially effective the idea of the arsenal ship being the successor to the battleship can be, we have to return to the one major barrier to the reintroduction to the battleship: cost. The cost isn't just measured in dollars, since it also requires securing the funding from somewhere. For the US, this means getting Congress to agree on military spending for something that isn't keeping the A-10 in service or part of a 5,000-page long bill that takes years to approve. Even for a nation like China, there still comes a point where justifying hundreds of billions along with manpower and resources towards a few super battleships becomes difficult over building a far larger number of smaller, cheaper ships. Think of it like running a business and buying only low production supercars for your work vehicles. Sure, it may look cool, but not only do you have to spend a ton of extra money on them, but the maintenance and running costs are going to be far higher. In the case of warships with proprietary weapons, it's even worse, as you also need to pay or create companies to make the spare parts and ammunition for them. Like I mentioned earlier, this means it makes far more sense to put that money towards improving or increasing existing production capabilities for existing ships. To tie this back into my supercar example, this is why companies buy fleet vehicles and car manufacturers often reuse parts on multiple cars. So while I'm definitely in agreement that seeing the return of the battleship would be amazing, when it comes to the question of if we should do it, I've yet to see a compelling argument for it. That is, unless you count the sheer amount of aura it would project to have a modern battleship as the flagship of your navy. Well, until it gets sunk by an attack launched from further than its guns can reach, that is. While I won't claim it to be an accurate portrayal of how modern naval battles are fought, I do think it's telling that the new modern era event in World of Warships Legends similarly doesn't feature battleships as playable vehicles. They do appear as enemies in the PvE mode, and they do about as well as you'd expect when confronted by a missile. Much like the disappearance of the heavy tank in favor of main battle tanks, the same can be seen at sea, with more versatile ships filling the requirements originally only a battleship could fulfill. The truth is, technology has made the big guns, which made the battleship so iconic, almost entirely obsolete. But what do you think? Am I wrong and there are other better reasons to bring back these iconic warships, or are they best left as relics of the past? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're down there, don't forget to use my link to start playing World of Warships Legends. Huge thanks again to them for sponsoring this video. If you want to see more naval-focused content like this, check out the Sails and Salvos channel where I've started posting most of these videos. Thanks as always to my ConelyFans for their continued support of the channel, and to all of you for watching. YouTube thinks you'll like this video, so I hope I'll see you there or in my next video.